Hey, hello, I'm Wren Ribeiro, and I want to connect with you about peace and justice. We are interviewing women who labor for peace, as we have forever and always will, until we all feel peace in our homes, our workplaces, our communities, and especially our bodies and minds. This initiative is named Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace. It's a show of intimate conversations with justice workers who are healing their self and communities from the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. Hello, and welcome to the show. This show is about taking steps, however small, to heal the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. And this episode 4 is part 5 of an exploration of misogyny. My wish is for you to explore and reflect upon some important topics with me that you might not otherwise immerse yourself in, and that afterwards you feel a bit more inspired and peaceful about life. I am Wren Ribeiro, and I wish you complete wellness and lasting peace. I don't know about you, but I love it when I'm in a group of people meeting for whatever reason, and we all take a deep breath together. So I am incorporating a moment of self-inquiry or grounding in each episode by asking ourselves, how is this beating heart right now? Today, my heart feels still and calm and grounded. Maybe just because I said, let's ground, it listened. How is your heart? I invite us to all take a deep, slow, integrative breath for a few seconds. The intimate conversation about misogyny that so far in parts 1 through 4 has covered important distinctions in how to define misogyny and ways to begin to reckon with it, both conceptually and emotionally, will today branch into waves of feminism, Hindu mythology, the preeminent Silvia Federici, and the complexities of reproductive labor justice. And it is possible to reflect on all of this with a light heart, right? The biggest societal changes can be called tipping points, like the generations of women pushing for the right to vote reached a tipping point in the 1910s, and like the generations of African Americans pushing for same rights as European Americans reached a tipping point in the 1960s, legally anyway. Movements for change like racial justice and women's empowerment upset the patriarchal order. Movements are multitudes of people who have had enough of injustice, and they join forces together to apply force to the people and institutions uplifted to the top of the socio-political scale by the many burdens carried by the people on the bottom of the scale. This rebalancing work is hard labor. The momentum or force needed to build a movement is compounded by the labor needed to prepare for and contend with the anticipated force by the people and institutions appreciating their uplifted view at the expense of those carrying their shifted burdens. I invite you to join me in a moment of deep appreciation for all the women who don't back down to misogyny. Women who spotlight the misogynistic behaviors that can be violent, subversive, and extremely difficult to investigate. I would fully enjoy getting into the weeds in order to name women who fit this description. Fortunately, the whole Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace show is about spotlighting such women, and I will continue to keep writing and recording episodes as long as I am able. History, or her story, remains alive in the retelling, so I will remind us of a few important elements of the 3 waves of feminism, as these details can inspire us in ways unexpected, can cut through emotional fog that we may be experiencing, and can reweave a sense of solidarity with trailblazers that is critical in taking any small or large step toward meaningful change. In the first wave, that began in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott presented their gender-inclusive versions of the Declaration of Independence, which they called the Declaration of Sentiments. In their time, women literally had no custodial rights to their own children. In 2020, I went to Seneca Falls for the 100-year celebration of women's suffrage, and I bought a copy of the Declaration of Sentiments that I had framed. I recently moved and need to find the frame so that I can put it back on the wall for inspiration. I just learned that the 19th Amendment, which finally gave women the right to vote in 1920, almost didn't pass. The mother of a Tennessee representative who planned to vote against the resolution convinced her son to change his vote, and that made all the difference. One vote. You remember that this victory was 50 years after Black men earned their right to vote, and the binary of race and gender was a very strong undercurrent in the first wave of feminism. The race versus gender divide continued to devastate justice in the second wave of feminism, and is perhaps just now, in the third wave of feminism, starting to be understood as a fight not for either or, but for yes and. We know that equality for women was almost a done deal and expected to become legalized in the early 1970s. However, after decades of women wrestling with their understandings of what it meant to be a feminist, to be pro-women, one woman who was initially aligned with the proponents of the Equal Rights Amendment, found her opportunity to flex her political muscles by rallying conservative women to fight against it. If you haven't heard of Phyllis Schlafly, you may find the miniseries Mrs. America quite eye-opening to watch. 22 states ratified the ERA in its first year. 50 years later, women are still waiting for legal equal rights. At least the Civil Rights Amendment, which, as you know, passed in 1964, prohibits employment discrimination based on race and sex. Let's breathe and reflect on that a moment. In episode 2, we talked about breathing and embodiment practice. I practice breathing with a Sangha in the Order of Interbeing created at Plum Village with Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. Recently, one of the many women who help hold our space shared an excerpt about equanimity from Christina Feldman's book, Boundless Heart, The Buddha's Path of Kindness, Compassion, Joy, and Equanimity. Christina explains various historical meanings of the word equanimity, from to be a guardian of and spacious stillness of the heart, to unshakable liberation imbued with kindness, joy, and compassion, a relational way of being with life. In this piece, she writes, quote, "We look at the world around us with all its conflicts, cruelty, and human suffering. We see the countless lives affected by clashing ideologies and beliefs. We look closer to our own families and relationships with their potential for alienation, misunderstanding, and conflict, the tangled knots of hurt. We know we can't fix it all. We understand the pressing need to bring as much kindness and compassion to the tangles we find ourselves in as possible. We learn that our insistence that life, other people, and ourselves be other than they are has the immediate effect of intensifying the tangle. We can begin to discover an inner stillness and poise in the midst of chaos. This is the gift of equanimity." I share this piece about equanimity as a foundation for moving into the very big subject of reproductive labor and what justice laborers are demanding. Last year on International Women's Day, which is March 8th in case you forgot, I went to a great celebration, and at a student-led table, I picked up a copy of Revolution at Point Zero, Housework, Reproduction, and Feminist Struggle by Silvia Federici. It took me months to actually start reading it, and I would truly like to study this important book in community. As the title indicates, revolution is always now, and that big shifts needed in society can arise as we expand our capacity for collective production and educate ourselves for self-government. Yes, women produce children. We all understand this. We also understand the unequal and unjust labors that befall women and gestational parents, domestic labors of house cleaning, childcare, and so much more have been aggrieved for centuries, for millennia. But Silvia Federici has researched and explained in great detail notions like the feminization of poverty, affective labor, and naturally, emotional labor. Speaking of housework, Silvia writes, "We are not speaking of a job like other jobs. We are speaking of the most pervasive manipulation and the subtlest violence that capitalism has ever perpetrated against any section of the working class." We'll hear again from Federici in episodes that spotlight capitalism, as her insights are remarkable. This author helped me to understand reproduction as the invisibilized drudgery of producing something, like a clean floor, over and over and over. She also helped me to arrive at my own definition of labor as that which affords inspiration and growth toward the experience of community and resonance. Work, on the other hand, is not liberation and should be paid. Women, often aggrieved by not just spending more time than our fair share doing domestic work, but also by the quality and results we produce. Pretending one cannot learn to scrub a toilet or properly clean a refrigerator is nonsense. Talking about daily dishes and deep cleans is a good thing, and a good collaboration in our domestic work requires us to want to have these conversations. Even though my partner was raised by a mom who made sure he knew how to vacuum and wash dishes by the age of 7, we have had the peace and justice discussion about housework many, many times over the years. When my children were young, I would read about one book a week, which was like the intensity of consuming information I'd had in college. I am back to this level of reading without the hungry ghost fervor of consumption and questing. It's more like receiving somewhat random author's art into my consciousness, and it has a peaceful rhythm to it. The book I'm halfway through at the moment is called How to Raise a Feminist Son by Sonora Jha. In episode 1, we looked at Andrea Dworkin's work naming the misogyny in many popular fairy tales. In this book, I was shocked to learn of the darker side of a few Hindi deities, and I have to include the details here. The author shares her determination to contradict the cultural misogyny in India, where she was raised, and turn to stories of mothers and sons in Hindu mythology. She writes about goddess Parvati, who birthed a son without a man, which, through Perkins Gilman's book, Herland, I learned is called parthenogenesis. This son became the deity Ganesh, the protector from obstacles. When her husband Shiva, who'd been absent, came back to find him there, Shiva kills him and an elephant and puts the elephant's head on the boy's body. Not altogether inspiring story time for Sonora Jha and her son. Jha shares 2 other Hindu myths of mothers raising sons. One about Krishna, adopted by Yashoda, because the king smashed the heads of all the babies born by his birth mother. Krishna is described as a feminist because he wrapped Queen Draupadi in a never-ending sari to stop the men from raping her. The last myth or fable is about Sita, the wife of Ram, who was banished by the villagers. She stood by him in isolation for 14 years, and when he returned, the villagers showed him great sympathy but said he needed to banish her to raise their twin boys, Lav and Kush. Ram is a real piece of work, as he not only let her get abducted, but then forced her to walk a trial by fire to prove her chastity. Sita died at age 56. And the legend has it that Ram lived to be 11,053 years old. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to extract ourselves from the history and present-day suffering caused by cultural beliefs and practices of misogyny. This episode of Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace looked at socio-political imbalance, the tipping points of movements for change, and the waves of feminism. It referenced the practice of equanimity as a strong foundation for understanding and demanding justice around reproductive labor. And it brought forward 3 Hindu myths where women raised sons in a hostile, deeply enmeshed misogynistic culture. And we will continue to breathe together. Join me for more of the conversation next time in Episode 5, Part 6 of the Misogyny series on Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace. I am Wren Ribeiro, and I thank you for joining. This initiative is supported by Inner Fortune, the full-life self-coaching journal that is now digital. Join us for peace, and thank you for your heart.